It's a new year, everybody! So my last video on Spider-Man did really well, but I don't have enough booze to talk about bad Spider-Man comics right now, so I'll talk about some good ones. Now, let's say after watching some of the movies and cartoons, you're interested in reading some Spider-Man comics. Which runs require you to have prior knowledge on what happened in the previous run for the sake of context? Do you start with Amazing Fantasy 15 and try reading hundreds upon hundreds of issues like a goddamn madman who barely has a social life? Tie-in events? Spin-offs? Which comics will send you to a downward spiral of alcoholism and depravity as you regret spending thousands of dollars on comics? Yeah, let's just get started in the video. Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski. After a less than stellar run from Howard Mackie, here comes Peter Parker as the Amazing Spider-Man in what's probably the last time the character felt consistent with his core ideals of power and responsibility, instead of primarily being about how unlucky he is as a person and how miserable it is to be Spider-Man. The run offers a mature dynamic that definitely feels in line with Peter's struggles during the original Lee and Ditko stories. It gives the reader Peter Parker as a high school teacher and how compassionate he is towards his students both as a teacher and a superhero, a supernatural aspect of the character's mythology with the introduction of the character Morlun before he was relegated to just being a Spider-Verse villain, a better take on Aunt May finding out Peter's secret identity than the ending of Spider-Man Homecoming, the last time Peter Parker and Mary Jane are written like actual adults with believable chemistry, and organic frickin' webs. I don't care what anyone says, organic webs will always be cooler than web shooters. Just please, try not to read two of the stories from the end of the run, Since Past and One More Day, unless you really want to. That will make you really depressed and not want to read Spider-Man comics anymore. Spider-Man by Roger Stern, a compilation of issues from both Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and the Amazing Spider-Man. If you're primarily looking for Spider-Man's most out-of-control battles that shows just how awesome action from a Spidey comic can be, this is definitely it. Stern manages to make the Vulture feel like a major threat to Spider-Man without feeling forced for the sake of an overarching plot. He gave readers the most unusual but probably the best battle with Mysterio after his first appearance, the best battles with Tarantula, which gradually gets more intense within each issue since that character was so obsessed with one-upping Spider-Man that he eventually became a spider monster, and this run just cannot be brought up in conversation without mentioning Spider-Man's battle with Juggernaut. No, for real. This is one of the best Spidey battles where he had to think outside of the box in order to defeat someone who's definitely out of his league. Oh yeah, and Hobgoblin, who's really awesome and all, even if Marvel's still inconclusive on who he really is. Seriously, is he supposed to be like Joker where we'll never know his true identity, or is it a mantle? Even though there isn't as much of a focus on Peter's life outside of Spider-Man in comparison to other runs, what Roger Stern wrote for Spider-Man encapsulate what makes that character's adventures so great. Spider-Man by J.M. DeMatteis. Even if someone has surface level knowledge with Spidey comics, they must have heard about Kraven's Last Hunt at least once, or have seen this imagery of Spider-Man rising from the grave. It's a masterfully written story that spans multiple issues from different Spider-Man runs that tested the character's limits and mental state as someone who had a loved one to come back to, Kraven in his last hunt to prove that he can be a better Spider-Man, and the death of Kraven. Until he came back to life and then more recently was cloned. Comics, right? However, not a lot of readers talk about his other work on Spider-Man outside of Kraven's Last Hunt, which is a shame because a lot of it is just as great, especially Best of Enemies, which, damn, this really hits hard as the best conflict between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn, especially how its ending doesn't have any text at all. All that's needed to tell what happened is what's shown in each panel. The death of Harry Osborn was that effective to the overall tragedies in Peter's life. Until he kinda came back in the Kindred Saga comics, right? Even during the infamous Clone Saga event, The issues written by DeMatteis has his characters written with much more humility than other writers at the time. He even added so much to Ben Reilly's character that made him a fan favorite among readers, which is a hell of a lot better than whatever Marvel is going with the character right now. Plus, this was written back when single-issue comic books were made to be enjoyed within their own merits, even if it was a part of a multi-part story. Contrast to nowadays, with a whole run or a volume being an overarching story, where you'd have to play catch-up. It seems like most comic books are made just to be turned into graphic novels nowadays. Spider-Man by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Well, you can't go wrong with what started it all. If you're curious about reading the original origins of Spider-Man, his villains, and all the original versions of his cast of characters, then look no further and be amazed. Spider-Man by Gerry Conway. I can't talk about some of the best Spider-Man runs without bringing up Gerry Conway. While Stan Lee and Steve Ditko laid the groundwork for Spider-Man and his cast of friends, love interests, and villains, Gerry Conway's characterization of a lot of these characters is what ended up defining Spider-Man for decades to come, and in adaptations such as cartoons and movies. Of course, there are the great battles such as Spider-Man's fight with Hammerhead, Molten Man, and Punisher's first appearance, but even though Peter Parker graduated high school on issue 28 of the Lee and Ditko run, he didn't truly feel like an adult then. It wasn't until this run that his love life was taken a lot more seriously. He's drawn to a nearly constant state of mentally struggling, and nearly every glimmer of his life interferes with his superhero life. Even side characters have their own personal demons, like how Harry Osborn was facing drug addiction. And, of course, the biggest highlight of the run, the death of Gwen Stacy. Prior to, The Amazing Spider-Man didn't have deaths that were this close and personal to Peter since Uncle Ben. Given how Amazing Adventures, which would become Amazing Fantasy comics, were like the Twilight Zone, and the death of Uncle Ben was the twist that was meant to punch readers in the gut. And the aftermath of how Gwen's death affected Peter, and how he tries to move forward in life as he gradually falls in love with Mary Jane Watson, makes it worth the read. This is the run that made Peter Parker grow into a more mature person. This is the run that emphasized the man in Spider-Man. Wait, what? What the fuck?